Welcome to the Ponderings of Pete. I'm Pete Wagger, and I'm torturing myself. Not really. I'm reading a lot of pages. 1,220, I think, is the exact page count of Rhythm of War. Welcome to the madness. Rhythm of War came out over a month ago now, and I'm reading it for the second time. Big thing. I'm not going to read it in 3 days like I did last time, even though I'm trying to because of the Reindeer Games readathon, but I'm trying. This is going to be a very, very spoiler-filled talk. If you haven't read all of the book, you should not watch this because I'm going to be talking about each part in context of the whole. And they're also going to be spoilers for a lot of other Cosmere stuff. Specifically in this video, I talked about Mistborn a lot, and I mentioned Elantris once, and I really didn't mention anything in Secret History as well. The very first section that talks about metals, it's just, if you haven't read Mistborn Era 1, I don't really mention anything from Era 2 other than specific metals. So, let's get into it. So let's talk some metals. In the epigraphs for the part 1, it's a lecture given by Navani Kholin in 1175. Presumably that is the year between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, because Oathbringer ends somewhere in the mists of 1174, so 1175, she probably gave it during that point in time. Other notable things about this lecture, at this point in time, they had not discovered, from what I could tell, they had not discovered aluminum at the time of this lecture, though by the time of Rhythm of War, they had discovered and named aluminum. So in chapter 17, it talks about how the simplest fused weapon isn't truly fabrical, but instead a metal that is extremely light and can withstand the blows of a sharp blade. Presumably that's aluminum that I know of, but when we look through the rest of the chapters, they specifically talk about aluminum. I mean, in Dawnshard, they discovered some of the uses of aluminum, and the Fourth Bridge specifically uses aluminum to work. They found it, they discovered it, they figured out how to make it in between Rhythm of War and Navani Kholin's lecture. I'm not sure the precise timing of Dawnshard, but I would say it's probably sometime after this lecture, but before Rhythm of War. This lecture was a huge, fun Easter egg for Mistborn, because all of these all the metals she mentioned are metals that are burned in Mistborn. We start seeing them in chapter 7 epigraphs. We have zinc and brass, which are, in Mistborn terms, the rioters and the soothers. And zinc is an external pulling metal, and then soothing is an external pushing metal. So how does this relate to what it does? Zinc wires will cause the spren inside to more strongly manifest, whatever that means, whereas brass will cause the spren to withdraw and its power to dim. Not its light, its power to dim, which is interesting because there's a difference between light and power. Next chapter, chapter 8, we have bronze, a warning fabrial, alerting one object or entities nearby. So this is a bronze cage around a Heliodor gem creates a warning fabrial. What does this mean? Well, bronze cages are the seekers in Mistborn terminology, so they're able to sense other Mistborn and other mistings. I'm not sure if they can sense Feruchemy and Hemalurgy. I think they can. I'm not entirely sure. And interestingly, seekers can sense through rhythms. So there's like a pulsing sort of thing, and you can tell the differences. Heliodors are, if you look into the Ars Arcanum in the back, is associated with the essence of flesh. So that makes sense. So the interesting question is, if you combine this with other things, so if you combine this with, I think, what did I say, sapphire? So if you do this, so if you use it with a sapphire, could you get it to detect like a specific translucent gas? Because sapphires are associated with air and translucent gas. And then smoke stones are associated with vapor or opaque gas, smoke or fog. So could you use that to detect certain opaque gas? I mean, really, you'd have to find a way to tell the spren inside to only look for a certain type of gas. So like with an opaque gas, you want to look for mustard gas, right? Or for a translucent gas, you want to look for, what's the thing? You can turn it into a canary in a coal mine, essentially. So that's a possibility. I don't know how specific you could get this fabrial to work. Now, a pewter cage. Pewter is, of course, the strong arms of the Mistborn world. They will cause the spren of your fabrial to express its attribute in force. A flame spren, for an example, will create heat. So this is an interesting turn of phrase, I guess. So my question is, with zinc and brass, it causes the spren to manifest more. Does it just grow bigger? What's the difference between expressing the attribute in force and manifesting in force? And essentially it said brass will cause your power, the spren's power to grow dim. Is that actually light? Or is it not light? Like, I thought there was a difference between the power. What's the difference between the power and the attribute? I think this lecture is a mite confusing once you get down into the actual specifics of it. But pewter are, we call these augmenters. If you can't tell, a lot of this will be me coming up with a lot of questions to answer. So if I ever get in and actually able to talk to Brandon or something like that, I'll just be like, and if you know any of the answers to these questions, please comment, tell me. Science, please explain. Next, in chapter 10, we have a tin cage, which will cause the fabrial to diminish nearby attributes. So it's the inversion of the pewter versus, so in pewter, pewter is an internal physical pushing metal, and then tin is an internal physical pulling metal. Pewter is strength, tin is senses. So essentially, tin cages cause the fabrial to diminish nearby attributes, aka pull inward. And it's interesting because it diminishes nearby attributes, even though it's an internal metal. A pain reel will, for example, can numb pain. Note that advanced designs of cages can use both steel and iron as well, changing the fabrial's polarity depending on which metals are pushed to touch the gemstone. Now we have polarity of the power. That's interesting. I think when it's talking about manifesting power, and then you have diminished and then you have the tin and the pewter, it depends on the spren. I think that's the clarification we're missing. So tin and pewter, even though they're internal metals, are diminishing nearby stuff. Like for instance, the example was a flame spren. Tin and pewter will cause it to take care of nearby attributes. As we know, spren do not create things. So a flame spren does not create fire, it is simply attracted to fire. So if you use for heat fabrials, it simply increases the heat that is already there because friction and all this other jazz. They probably trap agony spren into a pain rail and also probably use a Heliodor as well. That's my hypothesis. As to polarity, using steel and iron, pushing and pulling metals, if you're familiar with Mistborn, that's another interesting thing. So if it's diminishing nearby attributes, you're reversing its polarity. I'm not really understanding what exactly that's. So theoretically, if she switched the polarity, Navani switched the polarity of a pain rail to turn it into like a taser thing. So it was amplifying instead of diminishing. So if you combine, say, like steel and tin, you get pewter effects, essentially. That's kind of what it's saying to me. Well, I think they talk more about iron in another chapter, in the next chapter. Yes, an iron cage will create an attractor. So if you put steel and tin together, it's outward. Oh, outward versus inward. Steel and iron cage will create an attractor, a fabrial that draws specific elements to itself. In this case, tin diminishes a nearby attribute, and if you add steel to it, it'll actually take that attribute and push it on somebody else, essentially. A properly created smoke fabrial can gather smoke of a fire and hold it close, but not diminish it. So that's iron. And it says that the weird thing about it is new discoveries let it possible to create a repeller fabrial, but we don't know which metal to use to achieve this feat. I would think logic dictates it would be steel, but I don't know. Let's take a look at our handy dandy little Shadows of Self Ars Arcanum, because that's great. So if an iron cage creates an attractor, iron pulls nearby sources of metal, stores physical weight. It is an external pushing. It's internal pushing. Technically, you would think steel pushes on nearby metal would be the correct one for this. However, I think it's possible chromium could do that. Chromium wipes elementic reserves, so that's more of an external something. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I think it should be steel. I don't know if this is a contradiction that's within it, but, I'm going really, really deep into details. So, thoughts? We talk about conjoined fabrials, which we've kind of touched on before, where it's kind of like sympathy in King Killer Chronicles, if you read that, where it's like, hi, you have one, and you have a second paired thing where you move one, the other thing moves. Of course, Brandon takes this a step further and says, hey, let's create writing devices. And that's honestly the span reads are really cool. I think that's a great application of this technology. One thing it says is other types of spren do not split as evenly or easily or at all. So my question about this is specifically they use flame spren a lot for this. And is that flame spren tend to look to be the most, I don't know what's the word for this, gas-like? Like they're the thing without a form, essentially. So is this related to like their appearances in Shadesmar? So like depending on their appearance in Shadesmar, like we actually haven't seen a flame spren in Shadesmar. So that's an interesting question. I think that would actually verify this if we saw a flame spren in Shadesmar in one of these books. If it's easily splittable in Shadesmar, is it easily splittable in this? Also, what is the appearance of a split spren in Shadesmar? That's also a good question. Okay, so we have a second metal that conducts stormlight. We'll get to that in a second. I believe this was radium. The simplest sphere's weapon is not a fabrial, but instead a metal that's extremely light. We talked about this. This is aluminum. Second metal, a metal that conducts stormlight. The implications of this are astounding. So essentially it acts like wires and electricity. Use this metal in conjunction with a rudimentary fabrial, a simple gemstone, but without a spren trapped inside. They think they're using an investiture differential, but I don't think they are. It just kind of pulls it off and puts it into the gem. I think that's just what the metal does. Like it just like, the metal itself is like a vacuum. And I believe, if I remember correctly, this was radium. I'll talk about it in my part 4, obviously. Once we get to it, I think that was somewhere in part 4, and I'm not going to take the time to go look it up now. This is great. I have lots of questions from this, especially just like looking through the Ars Arcanum in one of the Mistborn books. It's like, okay, what do the rest of these things do? We got bronze. We didn't get the basic 8. We didn't get copper, but we got iron, steel, tin, pewter, zinc, brass, copper, bronze. We didn't get copper. We sort of got steel. I want to know more about the polarity thing. Like, Brandon, can you just release a science book about science of the Cosmere? Maybe when you're 75, after you're done. That'd be awesome. But there's all these other ones, like there's 16 metals here, so we got a good 8 of them. 7 or 8, because we got aluminum. So cadmium, bendeloid, gold, electrum, chromium, nicrosil, and duralumin. What do those do? And then we have the god metals, adium, laurazium, now rasium, and all the other god metals that exist. Trellium, whatever Autonomy wants to call herself. I really like the science, and I want to know more. So the next thing that I kind of noticed was kind of piqued my interest was Voidspren specifically. So this is going to be kind of referencing Shallan's interlude as well as some of Venli's comments about Voidspren. I think firstly, like my question is, where do Voidspren come from? Like what are they? Because they're not created from human perception like normal spren are. And I don't think the intelligence spren are created from human perception as well, but that's another, I'll talk about that next. So when in Shallan's interlude on page 287 of the hardcover edition, Shallan calls Odium something. Like Odium appears and she's like, oh, he's coming. But he was coming. God of passion, God of hatred, God of all adopted spren. And this goes into what is she actually talking about here? Is she talking about the Unmade, Voidspren, the spren that she's enlightened? I think she's talking about all 3 because I think Voidspren have not been historically referred to as her children. She hasn't talked about Secret Spren or the Storm Spren or whatever spren is inside Venli as her children, because then she would talk about all the Regals as like spren with her children inside them. Though I don't think she's been given the opportunity to reference that yet, so that may be a secret that he's hiding. I think also Shallan is trying to do something with connection with a capital C that is similar to Boado Mishram, who is confirmed to be crafty and conniving in this chapter as well. So the nature of we've only seen like 3 Voidspren. We know that there's a Voidspren in Venli's heart. We don't know what type because he hasn't told us. There's secret spren that seek out surges as they're being performed, and then there are the storm spren that went into the storm forms gem hearts. Those are kind of the three things, specifically Voidspren that we know about. We don't know what Ulim was. I don't think we knew what Ulim was. I could be wrong. We just don't know that much about Voidspren. I hope we learn more soon. Probably not until the back 5, I bet. He might drip us a little bit along with Taravangian. Let's talk about the Unmade. Where did the Unmade come from? My personal theory is they were bondsmiths. They were bondsmithspren originally. And they don't know it. So specifically in Shallan's interlude, it talks about, if he were to know the deepest secret parts of her souls, he would not be surprised, for she had come from him, unmade by his hand. Later in the book, Raboniel, when she's talking about corrupting the sibling, she talks about unmaking him. So is this a reference to the creation of Shallan and the rest of the Unmade, or is this a reference to how they were actually corrupted/enlightened? It would make sense, because I would think that Odium can do everything that his spren can do, including corrupt other spren. So each of them is kind of an aspect of Odium, but as a corrupted thing. She wants to be a god unto herself, and Odium also gets irritated when Shallan refers to the sibling as her cousin. Wonder why. A little bit early in the chapter, in 286, it talks about, Shallan talks about how Odium trapped them in a halfway existence. So I think that sentence kind of implies that there was something before Odium trapped them. And where is it? It's in here, because she talks about him unmaking her again. There it is. So if Odium caught her in a verifiable lie, he would unmake her again, steal her memory, rip her to pieces, but in doing so, he would lose a useful tool. So there's some element of deconstruction to the unmaking, which is interesting. And he would steal her memories, which I think it's interesting that she highlights that, which means I think it further points to the theory that Odium took bondsmithspren, corrupted them, stole their memories, and made them his own. That's my theory about the Unmade. So we would have had a 10th Unmade, unbalancing the number of 9, if the sibling had been truly corrupted. And specifically unmade. Not necessarily, corrupted is a good term for that. So rereading this with the ending in mind is interesting, because I didn't necessarily like the ending of, hi, I, Radiant, killed Ayali. I didn't like that. So, talking specifically to Shallan, this is page 109, we see the moment of which Radiant pricked Ayali. Notwithstanding the weird, I think Vale and Radiant probably collectively found the Black Bane without Shallan knowing. But Radiant was, so this is when they're taking Ayali to the thing. Now they're just going to let her play more games. Shallan let go, hand grabbing her satchel. Radiant was the one who emerged, however. She grabbed Ayali by the arm and towed her to Adlin's soldiers, handing her off. That's the moment she died. That's the moment she pricked Ayali, undoubtedly. And then the next seconds, you get the rest of the conspirators. Shallan asked, walking back to him, so she pricked her and then just retreated, which is interesting. My issue with this, there's no indicator that Radiant or Vale should be under suspicion. Because previously, Shallan emerged on the previous page, they're talking to Ayali. You're not dying today, the 3 said. I have more questions for you. Ayali kept her eyes closed. I won't get to answer. They won't let me. Shallan emerged, calming her nerves as several soldiers rushed up to surround Ayali. Vale and Radiant settled back, both pleased at this outcome. They were their own person. They did not belong to Mraize. And previously, instead the 3 dismissed her blade. I vote against killing her, Vale thought. Killing her would mean she'd been manipulated by Mraize. She hated that idea. So first of all, we have Mraize not wanting to kill her despite wanting to kill her earlier. And then it said Vale and Radiant settled back, both pleased at this outcome. So Vale didn't want to kill her, but Radiant was going to kill her. And at this point, Radiant's like, no, we're not going to kill her. So that's kind of a discordance. Where in this point does it really indicate that Radiant was just like, nope, let's just kill her anyways? There's no indication of a shift in any of the 3's thought process. There isn't any, oh, are we really doing well, or anything like that. And then further on, you have Radiant popping out and being like, so what happened? Damnation, Adolin said. What happened? We didn't do this, Vale thought. We decided not to kill her, right? Shallan, had she done this? She hadn't wanted to, but she hadn't, had she? She was more in control than that. I didn't do it, Shallan thought. She was reasonably certain. So what happened, Radiant asked. Lies. Radiant is not a lying personality. She can't, it's really hard for her to deceive. So, I don't know, it doesn't strike me as... I think there was one other part, like that's just kind of like... The thing about a good mystery is, in a good mystery, the audience always has a chance to figure it out. And I don't think that was here for this. I think this was a mystery that Brandon was trying to be clever, and he was trying to pull something over us, and he did, but he didn't do it in a satisfying way with this mystery with Shallan. I think specifically, I think I will reiterate this again when I get to the end of Shallan and Adolin's part in part 4. I think this storyline should have been spread out between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. I don't think it was well spread out. I wish he'd done his research on DID before Oathbringer, but I will talk more about that in my part 4 talk. So let's talk about Zahel / Vasher. This is going to be a quick blurb. We meet Zahel. He's washing laundry in Urithiru. Then when the attack comes, he's gone. Where'd he go? And Brandon has gone on record saying that he was going to write chapters for Vasher / Zahel, but he never got around to it because the book was so long, essentially. So he had plans for what he was doing. It just didn't happen. I like that. I did miss, like, after I read it, I went online and people were like, oh, where's Zahel? I was like, oh, well, yeah, where was he? Because I thought that would have been really cool if he had, joined the fight in. But he didn't. He wasn't even around or even mentioned. And I wish he would have mentioned him at least. But then again, I don't know what Zahel's doing. And I reread the chapter with Zahel and Kaladin, and there really wasn't much indicator of what he was going to do. It would have been nice to have some sort of indicator of oh yeah, I'm leaving, I'm going to go do this or whatever. And Kaladin's like, oh, okay. Because if I were Kaladin, Zahel would have been the first person that had been like, wait, he's not a Radiant. He didn't go to sleep. Let's go recruit him to take back the tower. But Kaladin never even had that thought that I can remember. If I do find it, I'll tell you. It'll probably be in part 2 or 3, but we'll see. So that's my gripes with that, but he may write those chapters eventually anyways, and they might be some bonus something that come out, which I think is kind of annoying. Just make another short story. That's all you need to do. Something he could do is he could take a bunch of tiny little chapters, because he has storylines for everybody. Take a bunch of tiny little interlude-esque chapters and make a compilation of them. That would be interesting, and just be like, hey, this happened here, I didn't put it in there. Essentially a short story compilation, but not a novella. Like things, interludes that are too short to be novellas, but couldn't be put into books that are like this. That would be something I'd be down for. Hey, here's additional stuff in a tiny short story. Another thing that struck me was Rlain talking about how he can't draw in Stormlight, even though he's a squire, per se, by Kaladin. And I think that's very interesting. The only other singer / listener that we know can draw Stormlight is Venli, and that is because she has a connection through a Spren, which makes sense. So that begs the question about the connection of humans and between humans and singers and their connection to Roshar, specifically, I think. Roshar and then the investiture around that is connected to Roshar, aka Stormlight, Cultivation Light, Lifelight, and any other type of light. I think it all relates to Boado Mishram. When Boado was captured, it's been described as ripping the souls out of the singers. And it affected all Spren. The sibling confirmed this sometimes, I think somewhere in part 3, that everybody, all Spren were affected by this. I think that's what caused the Dead Eyes to happen. That's what caused the possibility of Dead Eyes to happen, because there was a connection that wasn't there, and thus they were incomplete. Which makes it similar to Elantris. If you haven't read Elantris, I'm going to talk about that real quick. Elantris, the Sheod, essentially, because of changes in the geography of Elantris, the magic doesn't work. The magic is just like, I can't get through here because you need to draw the right shape. And so all the Elantrians are stuck in this in-between state of I can't heal, but I can't die. And that's just really, so if the Deadeyes and the Elantrians are similar, that makes interesting sense because that means there's a connection that's not there, aka Boado's. Because Boado, I think she was, the way she provided power is she was connected to Roshar. She wasn't, because Odium was away, she couldn't draw Voidlight from Odium. Odium was imprisoned on Braze at this point in time. But Boado managed to connect herself to the land, not to Odium. And when that was ripped away, catastrophic things. And the Radiants knew what they were, and that's what caused the Radiants to really be like, what have we done? We've just ripped the souls from all these Parshmen. We've done so many things. By imprisoning this, we have to get, we are no longer worthy enough to be considered Radiants. And their Spren were like, what have we done? Everything goes back to that. And that's why the Singers can't draw Stormlight unless they have a different connection. Because the Singers are no longer, even though they have the rhythms, they're not as connected to the land anymore. I don't know. I don't think we've really encountered Singers having difficulty. We haven't encountered listeners having difficulty with the rhythms. That's an excellent question. Did it affect the rhythms? Rlain indicates he can still hear the tones, so that's interesting. But I guess they lost their connection to Stormlight somehow, and Lifelight. So they need a different auxiliary connection, aka a Spren, to be able to draw some sort of investiture. And I wonder if, but I don't think the release of Boado will actually fix that. That's an interesting theory. Everything surrounding Boado and what the imprisonment of Boado did is fascinating to me because there's a lot of things that it did that really speaks to the nature of connection and what was happening and why the Radiants abandoned their oaths. Like at the end of Oathbringer, I was like, so they found out they were the Voidbringers and then they just, that didn't make sense to me. This book really helped me understand that there was more to it than that, which is why I love this book. So my next question, comment, concern was how the heck did Gavilar get anti-Voidlight? So throughout the book, it's stated that in several parts that Gavilar went to Braze and got Voidlight. That makes sense. He went to Braze. Yeah, that's talked about in the prologue. But the sphere that Gavilar gave Seth was anti-Voidlight. How did that happen? This kind of triggered Navani going after it, but that means that there is a source. Somebody else has discovered anti-Voidlight. So in the Ars Arcanum, which is written by, I don't remember who, but one of the 17th Shard, I'm pretty sure, they're talking about stone shaping and they're talking about command. So the Ars Arcanum are really interesting because there's these little Easter eggs even within the Ars Arcanum because it's written by somebody. It's not academic. So Stone Shaper must often make a command. This is much like many other arcana around the Cosmere and in itself not that novel. However, I find electrifying the news out of the mountains of Irithu, that their current queen, Navani, has been able to command the creation of anti-investiture. Long theorized this will be my first true evidence it is possible and can only be created through intent. So this is not something that is a new idea at the very least. So other people have been working towards this. I think it's possible the Ghostbloods had a hand in directing Gavilar towards specific experiments. They are the only other, unless there's some other secret organization that Gavilar was tied to, or some other secret person, that the Ghostbloods talked about the theories of anti-investiture to Gavilar, and he somehow figured it out. Because he had his hands in all these different pots. And in this book, we had a kind of a cleaning house of secret organizations. The Sons of Honor are gone. The diagram is gone for the time being. So, there's ripe for somebody besides the Ghostbloods to come in and be like, hi, we've been here all along. It's entirely possible. So somebody turned Gavilar on to that thing. And in the prologue, we see Gavilar inviting notable Artifabrians to come and talk to him without Navani's knowledge, because he was talking about specific things to them. And somebody had to create that box, which my personal suspicion is that the Sons of Honor created that box. The question is who? It wasn't Restaris. Restaris isn't smart enough to create that box, in my opinion. The box that takes them to Braze. Who created the box? Who is the... Could be the Shin. I bet, because Book 5 is going to wrap up Gavilar's arc of who he is and what he's trying to do. Probably. I think signs kind of indicate it's probably going to be somewhere in the Shin, or logic dictates that's where Gavilar's going. So either somebody's going to be hiding with the Shin, or one of the Shin themselves help Gavilar make the box. Probably. Let's talk some Jasnah. Jasnah is great in this book. We get tiny little snips of her, and I'm going to talk about the first one that we get in part 1. Jasnah wants to get rid of all the slaves. I love this. This is great. Hi, it's best time to do changes in times of massive political upheaval. Logic says yes. Everybody says yes. Let's release all the slaves. Do it. I'm excited to see what else she does. Really excited for her book 10, because she's going to get flashbacks in book 10, which means she's not going to die. Fingers crossed. So she's going to stick around. I'm excited to see more of her. I loved her in this book. I loved her battle sequences and her relationship with Wit. It was so cool. Jasnah's the best. So back when I was talking about Shallan, I mentioned Syl and was kind of Syl's revelations about honor spread and the rest, and my thoughts on that. I'll reiterate now. I don't think that the intelligence spren, the honor spren, the ink spren, the peak spren, I don't think they're the same as. I mean, obviously they're not the same as like anger spren and all the other things that are manifestations of perception. She says on page 281, how had the first honor spren or cultivation spren or ink spren or peak spren or any other of the intelligent ones been created? Have they been shaped by raw investiture by honor himself? Have they grown out of these, their cousins? She's talking about the wind spren. She felt so much kinship with them, even though they were clearly different, not as smart. Could she help them become smart? That's a really good question. So we have two different possibilities. Honor, specifically create honor, cultivation, the rest, specifically creating them. I don't think so. And we know the Stormfather created some of them. And we never really go, I think he talks about splitting off parts of himself essentially to create them, so they're like bits and pieces of honor. It's possible. I also think this kinship with the wind spren, the wind spren is not something to be ignored. Just like the ink spren probably have a certain kinship to logic spren, which make up Jasnah's plate. So it is entirely possible that honor and cultivation took existing spren that existed as human perceptions, created that just manifested into investiture, just manifested the perceptions, and they took them and evolved them, put pieces of themselves in them, type of deal. I think that's probably it's like the halfway answer between the two, but it's such an interesting question. Other things that Syl's interlude is great because it poses so many different questions, because why do we exist? She literally asks, why do we intelligent spren exist? And Stormfather was like, you exist for you exist to choose. Which is so interesting, which means it goes back to like, they're not a perception. Honor spren are not a perception of honor. Cultivation spren are not a perception of cultivation. Ink spren are not a conception, are not a perception of ink or whatever else they could be. Lie spren are not a perception of lies. I mean, that's actually probably the most easy one to probably say yes. But it's the nature of investiture. When there's too much there, things happen. So she talks about anytime too much power, too much investiture, too much self congregated, realms became porous and time behaves oddly. Oh, there's so much interesting things. So does it just like whoosh? So is there a difference between pooling investiture creating spren or pooling investiture creating time warps things? That's another interesting question. Syl also thinks Kaladin will be Dalinar's champion. Okay, is Dalinar actually going to be his own champion? Because that kind of invalidates... I mean, I guess Kaladin wouldn't be able to kill a child either. If you're not familiar with the child champion theory, look it up on 17th Shard, or I will talk about it in part 5. The Stormfather talks about... Syl asks, will you make me capable of feeling of what he does? I cannot do this thing, the Stormfather said. Your wishes are not evil, Sylphrena, but they are dangerous. You cannot or will not. I have the power, but not the ability. Does Dalinar? Possibly. Let's go back to the Ars Arcanum, because this is an interesting thing that it talks about. Soulcasters. The devices were created to imitate the abilities of the surge of soul casting. This is yet another mechanical imitation of something once available only to a select few, within the bounds of an invested art. The Honor Blades on Roshar, indeed, may be the very first example of this from thousands of years ago. I believe this has relevance to the discoveries being made on Scadrial and the commoditization of allomancy and feruchemy. That's a big wow. Honor Blades are simply imitations of soul casting, of surges. That's an interesting thing. So are there Spren trapped inside Honor Blades as well? Like, what does an Honor Blade look like on the cognitive plane? So many things he's just throwing at us, like just like slipping them in there. Just like, oh, here you go. That it explains a lot more why Radiance can do more. Like why there's more what's it called? Resonances is what Brandon Sanderson calls them, where you have resonances between different feruchemies and allomancies and all that jazz, whereas with here you have different resonances between just the surges and everything. Just the ability to attract Windspread and fly better as a Windrunner because of adhesion and the other thing kind of combined, I guess. I'm not sure what the resonances for Skybreakers would be, because they have the big fire one, the Dustbringer one. I think we'll see more of that in the next book, because the next book is the Skybreaker book. It's the Seth book. So we'll learn more about the Skybreakers then, besides the blurbs that we got in Oathbringer. That's kind of just the main things that I kind of noticed on a reread that are kind of like discussion points. If you have thoughts, let me know. I'm always willing to, like, if you have answers to any of the questions that I asked, because that's what mostly this is. This is me being like, what questions do I have based on this reading? That's what it turns into. Some of these I'm probably going to post eventually on the 17th Shard, because why not? So yeah. This book brings me more questions, and that's why I love Brandon Sanderson, is because there's always another secret. There's always more, which is great. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, go ahead and give it a like, because that's what it's for. If you want to see more, if you're waiting for the rest of my stuff for Rhythm of War parts 2 through 5, go ahead and give me a subscribe and turn on that bell notification as well, so I can let you know, or YouTube can let you know that the thing is happening and I released another video. Go ahead. Go ahead and live your life. Have a fun day. Night. I'm in day right now, which is why the lighting is different, but yeah, sleep well, or don't sleep, but do sleep eventually, please, because that's needed.